Yet another bad third period burns the Kraken against the Flames. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken lose in overtime to the Calgary Flames 4-3. The second time now they've lost to the Flames at home already this season, handing Calgary 2 of their currently 7 wins. And shoot, for that matter, at this point, the two Alberta teams have 12 wins between them, and 4 of them are against the Kraken. So I guess Seattle's just decided that they feel bad for Alberta and are just going to hand them win after win. And yes, those 4 losses, and I would also probably throw in the shutout loss to the Predators early on, are the 5 worst the Kraken have experienced so far. But at the same time, with how those opponents have been playing, those are games that even though the Kraken did end up with 2 points, losing 2 of those games in overtime, that's 5 games that you probably want to come out with the majority of the points in, and the Kraken only get 2 of 10 possible. And with that in mind, before we dive into this game specifically, which we will be getting to, I want to take a quick step back here with the Kraken, as we are now about a quarter of the way into the season, with the team having played 20 games, which is more than any other team in the NHL has played to this point in time, so maybe there's something to be said for the Kraken's struggles early on due to the hard schedule that they've had, not only having played the most games here early on, but also the majority of them on the road, and the majority of them, the 5 games that I mentioned excluded, being against hard opponents. But even with all that having been said, and even with the Kraken currently sitting in a playoff spot and 1 point under NHL 500, so largely in that playoff spot because of the extra games that they've played, this is a team that just about the only thing they've done consistently to this point in the season is found ways to lose games that they probably should have won. Which, even outside of the fact that that's obviously frustrating to watch from a fan perspective, to say the very least, it's also what, even in spite of the Kraken currently being in a playoff spot, doesn't give me a ton of faith that they're still going to be there come season's end. Because every season, and this is true almost regardless of the sport, you know that coming into the year, there's going to be a small handful of teams that are just so good that it really hardly even matters. You know that they're going to find some way to end up in the playoffs one way or another. At the same time, there's going to be a small handful of teams that are so poorly constructed, they're never going to have a chance from the get-go. But for the vast majority of teams, or at least the significant majority, whether or not they find success and end up in the playoffs comes down to their ability to find ways to win or find ways to lose the close games that they're in. And for the Kraken, last year, they were able to find a way to win a lot of those games, and as a result, they got 100 points in the standings and had no trouble making the playoffs as that first wildcard team. But this year, at least so far, they have consistently found those ways to lose those close games. I mean, if nothing else, that's clearly evidenced by the fact that they already have 5 overtime losses, which is tied with just the New York Islanders for the most in the NHL. And granted, the Islanders have done that in fewer games, but for the Kraken, that's a fourth of their games that they've lost in overtime or the shootout. And yeah, sometimes you could look at that as them finding a way to get back into the game and squeak out that 1 extra point, but those of us that have watched the games know that for the Kraken, that just hasn't been the case. But just in case you don't believe me or haven't been able to watch all the games, which you could be forgiven for, after all, there have already been 20 of them, and there's still the issue of Root Sports accessibility, especially for those that don't have cable. It'd be kind of nice if the Kraken would do something along the lines of what Vegas is doing with a through the team dedicated package of being able to watch all of the games over the course of the season, but that's a conversation for a different time. As far as those 5 overtime losses for the Kraken, all 5 of them, the Kraken had a lead at some point in the game. 3 of them, they had a lead in the third period, and in 2 of the games, they had a 2-goal lead at some point in the game. And that's not even to mention the 2 games that the Kraken have lost already this season, where they had a 2-goal lead and blew that to lose in regulation. So that's already a lot of potential points left on the board in the standings that the Kraken won't be able to get back. And that's without even mentioning a couple of other games that they played well in for the vast majority of, but managed to lose thanks to 1 bad period or even 10 bad minutes in the case of the home game against the Oilers. And it is actually one of those games, specifically the second home loss to the Avalanche, that reminds me most of how the Kraken end up losing this game to the Flames. Now, obviously, the outcome is vastly different. The Kraken lose this one 4-3 in overtime, so they at least get a point in the standings, whereas they lost that one to the Avalanche 5-1, so it really doesn't look close by the end of it. Now, I think a large part of that is that the Avalanche are just a much better team than the Flames, though I suppose it's really more the way the Kraken finished both of those games and in so doing managed to lose them that has me drawing the similarity between the two. Because they do start out fairly different. The Kraken had a 1-0 lead after 1 in that game against the Avalanche, versus in this game against the Flames, they were down 2-1 after 20 minutes. But in this game, that was unfortunately due a little bit more to how Grubauer played in the first period. He just clearly did not have it in this game tonight. He wasn't reading the puck particularly well and let in a couple of goals that you'd really like to see him save. Especially the second one that comes on a power play is just straight up a save that he has to have. It goes off of his side and into the net, off of his armpit. But even the first one, for that matter, was one that he probably should have had a save on as well. Now that one does come at the end of a terrible shift for the goard line to start the game. It's in the first couple of minutes, and the Kraken spent the entirety of the time leading up to this goal in their end of the ice. Just no ability to get possession of the puck and get it back across the blue line to even get any kind of reset, much less a chance to change any of the guys out on the ice. So eventually they get fatigued. The Flames are able to roll a partial change, and eventually it's a shot from right around the face-off dot that Grubauer does see coming all the way. There's not a screen or anything, so again, it's probably a save that he should be able to make, but it ends up past him. That's the 1-0 lead. Between the two goals, with the second one being on a power play, still, again, one that Grubauer has to have, the Kraken are able to score themselves to tie up the game at 1 before Calgary scores the second time. That coming a few minutes after the Kraken gave up the 1-0 lead early on, and it comes off of an offensive zone 1 faceoff by Wemberg, a clean faceoff win right back to Dunn, who skates it along the blue line and eventually just winds up a shot and fires it off on net. And for what it's worth, this is one that Vladar probably should have had himself. It ends up in the back of the net, cleanly past him, so the Kraken tie things up, but I've already said a couple of times they end up giving that right back within the first couple of seconds of a power play. A faceoff that I think the Kraken actually won that faceoff, but didn't win it cleanly, so the Flames are able to win possession back, keep it in that offensive zone, and yeah, a few seconds later, it's in the net as the Kraken aren't able to get the clear. Anyway, after all of that, we go to the end of the first period with the Kraken down 2-1, which is the score that the Kraken had going into the third period of that game against the Avalanche. The second period also goes fairly differently in this game for the Kraken. In that game, the Avalanche scored both of the goals to have that 2-1 lead going into the third, whereas in this period, the Kraken absolutely dominated this second period, outshooting the Flames by the end of it 17-6, and really most of those 6 shots for the Flames came in the first couple of minutes, which the Kraken are able to survive with Decord in net. Again, for Grubauer, some of the struggles he had might have been due to an injury that he got. He did end up getting kind of run over after the Kraken let up that first goal. It was potentially a goal if the puck ends up in the net past Grubauer, but because he got run over, it was waved off for goaltender interference. It was clearly goaltender interference, so not like there was any controversy there whatsoever, but it does bring a potential goal back there. Grubauer, for what it's worth, I think he might have actually been dealing with something, and this wasn't just a case of Hackstall protecting his goaltender by saying he had some kind of injury, as Grubauer was actually late to the bench to start the second period, so it wasn't like he was on the bench right away and Decord was in net. Either way, it hardly matters. Decord has the net to start the second, and Decord played pretty well right up until the final goal, but we'll get there. Anyway, to get back to the second period for the Kraken, after they survive that early attack by the Flames, it's pretty much all Seattle the rest of the way in this period, and pretty quickly, they end up with their first power play, which they do keep in the offensive end for the vast majority of it, but just aren't really able to create very much as far as dangerous scoring opportunities are concerned. Or at least not right up until shortly after the power play comes to an end, the Beniers line is able to get on the ice, and eventually it's Dunn who fires off a shot that's blocked out in front, but it goes right to Eberle, who's just parked himself in an open spot in the slot. Eberle takes that puck, makes one move, and then fires a shot off on net, which I don't know if he really got all of it, but he manages to somehow squeak it into a small little crack between the pads of Vladar and sneaks it through that 5-hole. So once again, some more wizardry here from Eberle for the second game in a row. Once again, able to find a way to sneak a puck through a goaltender through the 5-hole and get it to just slide across the goal line behind them. This time tying the game at 2. And then not much more than a couple minutes later, with once again this line out on the ice with their very next shift, it's McCann with the screen out in front of the net as Larson fires off a shot. Vladar makes the save, but the rebound goes right out to Larson again, who fires off a second shot, and this time McCann gets a piece of it with his stick, which breaks in the process, and then also gets a bit lucky here with the puck that I think even with that tip was gonna go wide of the net, but it hits some sort of weird edge or a little crease in the ice. But regardless of how it ends up happening, it does take a bit of a favorable bounce for the Kraken to change course after the McCann hit from going just outside of the net to going just inside it, getting McCann his 8th goal of the season and giving the Kraken the 3-2 lead. And then even from there, the Kraken really are able to maintain momentum all the way through the back half of the second period and another power play that they end up getting. Although that power play honestly looked worse than the first, they do end up getting a decent chance towards the end of it, but that doesn't go either. So by the end of it, we still do get to the end of 2 with the Kraken leading 3-2. And then in the third period, I wouldn't say the Kraken quite fell apart like they did in that third period against the Avalanche, but they weren't able to generate any offense whatsoever with that 1-goal lead, with any ability to build on it, which is kind of like what we saw in that game against the Avalanche, where the Kraken down 1 in that case, and you would think trying to push to even things up and at least get it to overtime, only ended up with the 1 shot on goal across that entire third period, and if you remember, that came from their end of the ice. Whereas in this period, they do end up with 4 shots on goal, but none of them are particularly dangerous. And while that does, through the first half of this third period, kind of serve to at least stall the momentum that the Flames get, eventually, as it gets later in the period, the Flames get more and more desperate, press more and more towards the Kraken end, and as a result, spend more and more time in the Kraken end of the ice, which includes a power play that they get here late in the third that spends almost the entirety of it in the Kraken end. And granted, they kept it to the outside and don't let the Flames score on that power play, but not long after the power play comes to an end, there's a face-off in the Kraken end, which the Flames win. It comes back, eventually a shot on goal. Decord makes the save, but it bounces off of his chest out in front of the net. He doesn't quite see it. He thinks it went to one side of him when it actually went to the other. And of course, the first guy that sees it is Andrew Mangiapane, who puts it into the net to tie the game at 3. And I don't want to get too worked up here, but as far as the Mangiapane situation is concerned, if you'll remember, this is the same guy who, in that game just a couple weeks ago against the Flames in Seattle, cross-checked McCann, who was face down on the ice, cross-checked his shoulders into the ice, and McCann then slamming his head and losing a couple of teeth, bleeding from the mouth and leaving the game for a little bit. The Kraken had no response to that whatsoever in this game, not even so much as a challenge to a fight or a particularly hard check really at any point. I mean, it really is like they completely forgot that Mangiapane did that to McCann. It just seems like at this point we have to accept that this Kraken team isn't really going to fight back when things happen to them. They're just going to go with the trying to make the opponent pay for it on the scoreboard. And for what it's worth, it is strategically better to not send players to the penalty box for them. But at the same time, you then actually have to make the opponent pay on the scoreboard for that approach to it to work, which they did last season. But this season so far, yeah, they just don't seem to really have much of a backbone, and then also aren't able to make their opponent pay where it matters. Regardless of that, though, now because the Kraken let the Flames just hang around in this third period and really didn't do much to press to try to extend their lead, eventually a weird bounce and a rebound allows the Flames to tie it, and a couple minutes later, we head to overtime. And in overtime, once again, the Kraken do their thing of getting possession and maintaining it for the vast majority of it, but just aren't quite able to find that good scoring opportunity that they like to take the shot on. They do end up with 1 shot on goal, but it's saved, and then eventually the Flames get the puck in the final couple minutes. They get down to the other end of the ice where Rasmus Andersson catches Decord, maybe leaning a little bit too far out to the side of his net to block off a potential tight angle shot, so Andersson decides to go for a wraparound, which Decord, for his credit, does make a spectacular diving save back to the other side to prevent that from going in. But the rebound from that diving save goes right back to Andersson, who picks it up and has, of course, with it being 3-on-3, all the time and space he needs to just put it right back past Decord off the rebound to give the Flames the 4-3 win. Now, I suppose with this game in the end, you could look at it as the Kraken didn't necessarily lose it in the third period. After all, 2 of the goals they gave up in regulation came in the first, and both, again, off of shots you really do need to see saves on. Though with the first one, they did spend a minute and a half straight in their defensive end with the opponent having the puck and weren't able to get it even across the blue line to break that up and get a change. So while the shot is one that you need to save on, you probably needed to get that puck out of your end of the ice long before that shot came in the first place. Either way, there's not much of an excuse for Grubauer on the second shot. Just a tough game from him. Still, I would make the argument that you come back and respond to that with that fantastic second period, and then you come into the third period and just straight up lay an egg. Don't really have any sort of desire, apparently, to extend that lead to protect yourself from 1 or 2 random bounces ending up in the net. As things stand right now then with this team, I really don't know what to think of them at this point. Again, they are technically in a playoff spot here at the infamous Thanksgiving break, which does tend to be a bit of a benchmark where statistically 75 to 77% of teams that are in a playoff spot at the Thanksgiving break end up making the playoffs at the end. Though that being said, that is based off of points percentage, and although the Kraken by points are in a playoff spot by points percentage, they are just outside of it. So there's a bit of ground to make up there. So I guess in that way you could look at this optimistically and think that, well, if they have found ways to lose all these games and are still that close to a playoff spot, then if they're able to turn this thing around even to some degree, they should have no trouble getting into a playoff spot and holding it. At the same time, though, they really have not shown evidence to this point that they're going to be able to do that, at least not in a consistent enough manner for it to end up making a big enough difference, especially considering that they're probably going to have to get one of those 2 wildcard spots if they do want to end up in the playoffs, with the top 3 teams in the division kind of running away with it. Now, it does certainly help that outside of the top 3 teams in each of these Western Conference divisions, the rest of the pack really doesn't seem to have too much of an interest in claiming the wildcard spots either, so the Kraken, because of that, are still here in the mix, but they also now just lost 2 games to one of the other teams in the mix in the Calgary Flames. Plus, they lost the one earlier to Arizona and have lost one to the Blues, who are the other 2 teams that are right around that spot at this point. Anyway, there's still obviously a lot of season left and plenty of time for the Kraken to get this turned around, but we need to see them do it on a consistent basis, and with them now 20 games in, having yet to win 3 games in a row, well, let's just say I'll believe it when I see it. And finally, with the Kraken 3 stars in this game, which as always is brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon, if you do want to help decide these Kraken 3 stars, or if there are 3 stars in cases like this one, you can help support this channel a little bit more than you already are by watching to this point by going through the link to Patreon down below and supporting over there. And in that vein, a special shout out for this one to Evan Kritz, who joined since the last one, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. If not, feel free to correct me down below. I'd like to get it right. Otherwise, for the 3 stars, Jordan Eberle is certainly deserving of one. He's been really playing fantastic hockey for the Kraken here over the last couple of games. McCann, I think, also very deserving of one. That whole Beniers line played pretty well in this one, but those 2 in particular. And then 3rd star, I am going to go with Decord. He was very good for the Kraken through the 2 periods that he played for them. He does kind of make a bit of an error to allow that overtime goal to go in, but he at least tried to make up for it with that diving save back to the other side. Either way, it's not a particularly confident 3 stars for me in this one, so we'll get through it pretty quick here. Eberle, McCann, and Decord. If you have different 3 stars that you'd like to pick in this one, or don't think there should have been 3, as always, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below. General thoughts about where the Kraken are at right now, with again just that one more game left now before Thanksgiving, and we hit that point where 3/4 of the team that are in a playoff spot by points percentage are likely to make the playoffs, and currently the Kraken are not one of them. Hopefully they can get it turned around, but if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel for free. If you really want to support a little bit more, there's that link to Patreon down below as well. And until this last game before Thanksgiving, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.